Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we discuss the news, information, and emerging thought with leaders from across the healthcare industry. My name is Bill Russell, recovering healthcare CIO and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts and videos dedicated to training and developing the next generation of health IT leaders. Today, I have a special guest, a friend of mine and an author and an expert in the area of developing, finding, and attracting A players and developing great teams. Herrenkohl, and we're going to have a little discussion by the pool. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it. I'm really focused in right now on this whole topic of identifying the best talent, developing them, training them, mentoring them, bringing them along. And I found a handful of people that I really respect and want to share their thoughts with you. So I really hope you enjoy it. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics. Want to start your health IT projects on the right track or want to turn around a failing project? Let's talk. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. And now, here's the show. So today's guest is one of the four most famous people to graduate from Freedom High School, and and a friend of mine, the author of How to Hire A Players, Herrenkohl, joins us today. And I'm glad you're here. I have really been focusing in on hiring top talent and building out great teams, and it's just great that you're able to join me this week.
Oh, this is awesome.
So top four, who are the top three most famous people, you might ask?
Well, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has got to be number one.
Well,
right?
so
he's far and away. So who's number two, I ask?
Well, number two has to be Daniel Day Kim.
Well, that's true.
Yes.
That's true.
Right. So he was on Lost. He was on Hawaii Five-0.
Right.
Number three has to be Todd Johnson, who, of course, you don't know.
I don't have no idea who that is.
He was about 3 years younger than us, was in the band, but he was the founder of Health Loop, and he's been on the show, and he was the number one quote from last year's show.
Well, there you go. Congratulations to Todd.
Yes, Todd was. I asked Todd, what's the most important thing for project success in a health system, and he said, conviction around a thesis. And he said a lot of health systems lack that conviction around a thesis, and therefore the projects end up meandering. And I thought, well, there's a Freedom High School education that
That's
actually.
Good. That's good. That's good stuff.
That was really good. So Eric, as a little bit of introduction, obviously you wrote this book, How to Hire A Players, available on Amazon.
Sure.
Out there for a while. You've been have been and are an executive recruiter as well.
Yep.
Not necessarily within healthcare, but which I kind of like because we can talk,
more openly.
More openly. That's probably the best way of saying it. And then. And now you're sort of doing the other side of it as well. And much more so of you're coming alongside A players and helping them to find great organizations.
I am, right, and working on career strategy and career coaching, and I'm really enjoying that piece of the business as well.
Well, that's great. So let's just start with the open-ended question, which is, John Wooden once said, the team with the best players usually wins.
Yeah. We
all know that. I mean, that's just fundamentally we know if we've ever been on a team or if we ever managed a great team, we have great success. What differentiates the leaders that are able to build great teams versus maybe leaders that struggle to build great teams?
Yeah, well, one of the things, so I wrote this book, How to Hire A Players, because every leader recognizes what you just said. You got to surround yourself with the best talent, and the best talent wins. I'll tell you what's really interesting that you find doing executive search is that there are not that many places for an A player to work. And I've got a great story about this. I was early in my recruiting career, and I was recruiting accountants, like out of the big 5 accounting firms, and I presented a candidate to a number of different employers, and one of these employers was like a VP of finance. And I said, listen, you got to talk to this woman. She's like, passed her CPA exam on the first sitting. She's skyrocketed through PwC. She's amazing. And he said, Eric, listen, I'll talk to her, but you and I both know there are not that many places for an A player to work. And it was my job at that point to argue with him that wasn't true, but I hung up the phone and I thought to myself, you know what, this guy's exactly right. And so one of the things I think that I would say as an outsider, an executive search consultant looking in, is most organizations are average, and most leaders are average at best. So if you have a scintilla or two of true leadership ability, recognize you have a tremendous competitive advantage. And do the things that you do. I mean, set a vision, hire really good people, don't micromanage them, we all know that. I mean, we've all read the books, right? This is not like this is top secret about what good leadership looks like. I'm just saying it doesn't happen that much out there. And if you do that, among other things, you're creating an environment. You have 2 or 3 A players on your team. Guess what? The 4th A player who sees those 2 or 3 is like, I want to be a part of that team. That's what people want. So it's a big advantage.
Yeah, it's interesting. Toby Cosgrove, former CEO of Cleveland Clinic, essentially said something similar to that. Essentially, he was asked about career advice, and he said, find the best organization to be a part of and just go join that organization. And I think part of that is you surround it as let's assume we're all A players, as an A player, and everyone listening to this is an A player. As an A player, you want to surround yourself with other A players. They help you to be better, they help you to think better, and eventually it ends up being a great network of people that you can sort of fall back on and have conversations with.
I totally agree with that. I'll tell you the other thing, by and large, people do what they see done.
Yeah.
It's true of kids, and it's true of people in the workforce. So you tell me where somebody grew up professionally, and I'll tell you, by and large, the kind of leader that they are, and the lessons that they learned, and the people that they emulated. So if you can figure out how to get yourself into an organization around people who are worth emulating, even in ways you're not going to even appreciate, that's going to pay off.
Well, it's interesting. Healthcare, we're becoming a consumer organization, type of organization, and we're starting to hire people from outside. So if I were to hire somebody from Disney, what would that tell you about that person?
Well, I mean, what it would tell me about, Disney obviously has an amazing reputation. I will say the converse is also true, right? I mean, one of the lessons I learned and was taught in executive search is you really want to try to stay away from being cynical, but you have to be highly skeptical. So one of the first things, if I was hiring somebody out of Disney, was to make sure that the halo effect wasn't in place. Right. I'm not hiring Walt.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I'm hiring Jim Jones, who has Disney on his resume. So maybe this guy's a total knucklehead.
Right.
I think you do have to be very careful about that. But obviously, there's a whole level of kind of guest orientation and customer service and all the other things that go along with Disney that you would expect that they would absorb.
Because they've been in that culture, and hopefully they've absorbed some of that.
Right.
Same thing with, like, say, a Southwest Airlines has a great reputation, and you would think that somebody who's come through Southwest Airlines sort of has picked up some of the culture that's there.
You would again, but again, and without going into too many details, I think partly Southwest has an amazing reputation from the CEO it used to have. So you just have to make sure that you understand what's going on in an organization today. Again, this is where the skeptical, not cynical, kind of comes into play.
Right.
So
that's interesting. So let's assume, I think it's the first, because we've talked about this before. I mean, the first thing is, make sure you're the best leader you could possibly be. Right. There's sort of a layer that you are as a leader, and rarely do you hire somebody that's a better leader than you.
Agreed.
So that's the sort of the cap on what you're going to hire. So anytime you can increase that, that's going to be better. But let's assume that you are a strong leader and you want to hire some great leaders. How do you go about doing it?
Well, one of the things that I always talk about is the importance of being recruiter in chief. And to me, recruiter in chief. So here's the story that goes along with that. I was giving a talk a number of years ago at the Engineers Club, St. Louis, Missouri. I'm up on stage, and there are, I'd say in the room, probably about 99 engineers aged 24 to 35, kind of seasoned youth. And
and they're doing yard work right next door.
And they're doing yard work next door.
Which would be par for the course. Last week I was on a golf course and planes were flying overhead and stuff. So I'm sorry. So Engineers Club.
Yeah. So Engineers Club, St. Louis, Missouri, ages maybe 24 to 35. I've got 99 engineers that fit that bill, and then one guy over here to my left, probably 55, polished professional, quietly holding court at his table of 8. And I'm nothing if not curious, so I made sure to make my way over to this guy afterward and introduced myself, and I kind of was hinted around, but I wanted to figure out why he was there. And he said, Eric, that's very simple. I'm recruiter in chief in my business.
Yeah.
And listen, there are a lot of things that go into being able to acquire top talent. But one of the things that I would say is to understand that if you're the CEO or the leader of a business unit, on the one hand, you're unbelievably busy. You don't have time to do all the recruiting. I mean, you have a team of people that does that.
Right.
But you cannot delegate the responsibility to be kind of the face of your business. And I do think you have a responsibility to be out and about in the communities where talent is hanging out, just meeting people, being available, shaking hands, knowing and being known. Because among other things, we talked about modeling, the importance of modeling. You're modeling that to the leaders who work for you. You got a whole organization that does that, and I think you have the ability to attract a lot more talent.
Yeah. So it's interesting, recruiter in chief. That's a great concept, and I really took that to heart as a CIO for an organization, of getting out there, maintaining my network. When I was at conferences, I was always looking for people that just gave a phenomenal presentation.
Right.
Make sure to make the introduction, make sure to know them. Well, one of the things I did for my staff was each one of them, I sort of gave a part of their review every year, and part of their sort of their score for the year was on their ability to expand their network and to, and I mean, no offense against the executive recruiters, but my first bent would be to have my staff go, hey, I've got 5 people available for the next job that's coming available. It saves that money, but it also, generally speaking, they're partially vetted. I mean, you've listened to them speak, you've talked to some of their peers, you've sat down with them, you've met with them at 3 or 4 conferences, and you sort of have a feel for who they are and how they're going to plug into the organization. So, I mean, that concept becomes key. What are you looking for? I mean, one of the phrases you gave me a long time ago, and I've used it 1,000 times, which is, past performance is the best indicator of future results.
Right.
And so, is it generally just a resume walk where you sort of get it, or how do you get deeper into what their past performance is to make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any silver bullet, first of all, answer. One of the things that I will say is that I always ask this question when I'm speaking. I'll say, so it's 2019 in the United States of America, in the litigious society in which we work and live. How many of you believe that references and the value of a reference check is essentially dead? Dead. Yeah. And I give people
a lot of them.
And half the room at least will raise their hand. I totally disagree.
Well, because if you're in a large organization, you're coached that when you get that phone call, even if you get that phone call, because now there's hire right, and a couple other things, but if you get that phone call, the answer is, here's our HR department.
Name, rank, and serial number.
Yep.
Right. We don't have to run down the whole reference thing, because your question was more about if you have your own staff engaged. Yep. Here's the point. This person has worked for somebody, right? Yep. This person that you're thinking about interviewing, thinking about hiring, they've worked in an organization. Probably at this level, they've worked there 20 years, out of 15 years, I don't know. So some buddies know whether they're a rock star or a knucklehead.
Right.
It's a known. It's just a question of whether you can tap into that. So the number one thing that we all look for, again, this is not surprising, is what do people say about this person? Now, you can't go on one person.
Right.
Maybe one person may have a vendetta. We know how this works.
Yeah,
one person is an opinion, right? And 2 person is interesting. But 3 people is start to be a trend, and 5 people it's a done deal. So I'm always looking for what people have to say. And by the way, it's another part of the reason from a networking perspective that we want to know people, because I may not actually be interested in hiring you. I may be interested in hiring Jim, but you know Jim. So what do you have to say about Jim? That's helpful feedback for me to know.
Yeah.
There are other components of it. I can talk about some of what I have found to be some of the kind of core characteristics across players across industries, if that's of interest.
Yeah, no, that'd be so. I mean, but just closing that theory out, one of the things you challenged me, I think almost a decade ago, you said, ask for 6 references. And I thought, because at the time, everyone was asking for 3 references.
Right.
And it was interesting, after I started asking for 6 references, a couple things happened. One is the number of people I was networked to became bigger.
Right.
Just out of the chute.
Exactly, yeah.
And invariably, when you talk to those 6 people, you find some good candidates, which is
it's also true.
Very interesting.
Yep.
But the other thing that happened is, it's hard for some people to put 6
Isn't that interesting?
people together.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
My analogy there is that some people are like clear mountain streams, and other people are like the Everglades.
Wow.
Clear mountain stream. I can see right down to the bottom of you. What you see is what you get. Everything I hear from you is what your references say. Everybody's like, oh, Bill Russell, awesome guy, tremendous, absolutely. Love Bill, love Bill, love Bill, love Bill, love. Other people, it's like, I'm interviewing you. I cannot really get a feel. Like, you've obviously done some good things. You've been a part of some good organizations. I can't really get a feel for you. And then your references are kind of like all squirrely and squishy. You're opaque. That makes me very nervous.
Yeah.
And so I think you're absolutely onto something. And the references, by the way, end up being a great source of candidates. That's recruiting 101. The first search firm you go to work for, that's one of the things they teach you. So yeah.
Well, and if you're going to be the recruiter in chief, this is the kind of stuff you have to know and have to.
You do. And again, I really want to emphasize. I understand that people who have C in their title, right? You're not hired to be a recruiter.
Right.
You got 150 other things to do, and but as a strategic advantage to really understand this, if nothing else, if you and your people really understand this process well enough to really be able to partner up with internal recruiting, right? And say, listen, this is what I'm looking for. Let's sit down and have a conversation. Internal recruiting has 35 open job specs per person, right? And you're become a great client. Figure out how to work with them. Figure out how to make them work for you, and so that you become the person that they give the great candidates to, and then all the other departments are the ones they don't pay attention to.
This is what happens on this podcast. It sort of gets my mind going. So talk to me about the job description, because it's interesting to me. I've seen a lot of the executive search bios or not bios, executive search. What do you call it?
Job spec.
Yeah, the job spec for them, and I read some of them and I'm going, that's not what you want. I understand how they got there. It was like job spec by committee,
right?
And everybody sort of just put their thing in, and
right.
I'm like, if you hire that person, you're not going to be happy. It's my first thought.
Interesting. Yeah.
But the other challenging thing is, you get the phone call and they say, hey, they'd like to talk to you. Your resume is really interesting to them and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you show up as? I mean, it's like, okay, you're trying to hire a tactical CIO who's strategic, and you're looking at it going, all right, so if I'm too strategic, the tactical people are going to go, well, he really doesn't understand the blocking and tackling of the job. And if you're too tactical, the strategic people are going to go, well, he doesn't understand the trends that are going on in the industry and where it's going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, one of the things that's happening in that situation is you've got, one hiring manager, but you have 3 or 4 at least really significant influencers in the decision, and they all want to hire different people. No, that's literally what's happening there. One of the things I will say about a really good executive search, outside executive search consultant, is coming in up front, upstream, and getting everybody on the same page as much as there is able to say, listen, this person doesn't exist. Right, you're hiring a healthcare CIO, and you want all these things, and the base comp is whatever it is. First of all, this person doesn't exist, and if you could find them, they wouldn't work for you; you'd work for them. So that's partly when you see a job spec like that, it's reflecting the fact that the decision makers within the organization have not really gotten on the same page.
And the role of the executive search firm. Even though I understand this would be hard, just thinking the organizations I've been a part of, this would be hard. But it's really almost to get everybody in the same room and go, okay, here's what you've described. Let me tell you what you've described in terms of the person, and have them sort of fine tune it.
And prioritization. Right. I mean, really, it's prioritization. Would you take all these things? Yeah, but let's stack rank them and figure out what are the things that you absolutely positively must have. That's very, again, kind of pull the curtain a little bit on executive search. That's very important in terms of getting deals closed.
Right.
Because if you can't get people up front to agree on what the priorities are, then when you get downstream and everybody's like, well, I don't know, because this guy, eats granola on Thursday mornings and I'm not in favor of that. You're like, hey, listen, we agreed the priorities were not the granola, it was these other things. And so, that's how we're going to actually get the deal done.
So it's in working with the executive search, and then we're going to flip the page here in a minute, because I want to talk about the 8 players in the audience who are saying, okay, how do I manage my career? And I want to come back to that. But I think one of the important things to remember is executive search firms don't work for the candidate; they work for the firm. And we hear this all the time. And people go, "Well, just remember, they really work for them. That's who pays them. That's
right."
But what does that mean to the candidate? I mean, that they're really more focused on the client. They should be focused on the client.
And you and I were talking about this offline. I think it's really important to understand. I believe that you can take any job position, any position, and draw it in a pyramid, At the foundation of the pyramid is the fundamental requirements of the job. Like, you better be able to do this, otherwise you're going to get fired and fired quick. And then the top of the pyramid are the differentiators, the thing that really make you stand out as an A player. So if you're an executive search consultant, the foundation of the pyramid, you're a broker. You're brokering stocks, you're brokering pork bellies, you're brokering people. It doesn't matter, you're a broker. You're a deal maker. That's what the job is. There's nothing wrong with it. So executive search consultants are not, they're not nurses. They're not social workers. They're not, and I'm not glorifying this. I'm just stating the fact. They're not really interested, by and large, in helping people. They're interested in doing deals. So by and large, executive search consultants are like, hey, listen, don't call me, I'll call you. I figure I get a particular position open, and I'm going to start, working my target list and calling the people that I think can help me. And then the only caveat to that is, if you're a C-level person or a VP, EVP level person, and I think you can or will generate business for me down the road, you'll hire me to run searches, then I may put you at the top of my list. I mean, it is what it is.
Well, that's why I appreciate having you on, and not necessarily somebody who's working healthcare right now, because they'd be concerned about saying that. But that there's a certain sense of which I've experienced that. You can see it in the industry of people really do the search firms. When you call them and they don't have a job per se, they'll essentially say, hey, it's great talking to you, those kind of things, great catching up. But it is almost we'll call you when something comes up.
And by the way, the person that you're calling, the senior level person at that firm, has 40, 50 open jobs at any one time.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they are the front people of their own organization, right? And they got an incredible amount of stuff going on. And by the way, they know if they decide to call you, are you going to take their call?
Yeah,
you're going to take their call
because they have a job.
All right, there we go.
That is how it works. So let's talk to. You said how to hire A players. I guess your next book will be what to do if you are an A player. You've just found out you're an A player. Now what? Because for A players, it is hard to find those right companies to work for, and more specifically, the right leaders to work for.
Agreed.
So where do you start with them?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think is very interesting about interviewing is it's a skill like any other skill. You get better at it the more you practice. So the people who are out looking every 3 to 3.5 years, right, moving organization and hopping. They actually, if they're fairly astute, can get pretty good at interviewing. What you'll often find with really top people is they're kind of heads down. They're not playing they're not playing games. They're moving the ball forward. They're having a lot of wins at work. They're getting recognized, getting promoted. But the thing we all have to recognize is sooner or later, we're all getting fired. You're getting fired. I'm getting fired. We're all getting fired. Yeah. And while that's
and there's a lot of reasons to get fired.
There are a lot of reasons why. I'm not saying it's going to be a performance issue, but you're going to get fired. And the higher you climb up that organizational chart, guess what? The closer you are to getting fired. So listen, that's very unpleasant. Nobody likes to live with that kind of reality. But if you live with that, you let that sink in for a moment and take some time and reflect upon it, it should change your behavior. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of how the starting point, I think, of how A players need to go about thinking about taking control of their own careers.
Should change behaviors, but not change behaviors in the way of, I need to hold on to this job for dear life.
No.
It changes your behavior in terms of understanding, I probably will interview a couple times before I retire and be moving jobs. Maybe not every 3 years, but every 6 years, every 8 years or something to that effect.
You want to know here's one very tangible thing it can change on your monthly calendar. There's some meeting that you didn't take, or some association or group that you didn't attend, or some talk that you didn't give, that if you really owned the fact that you're going to get fired, you would have taken it.
Right, because you need to keep.
Because you got to stay out there, Listen, the vast majority of the population does not like to sell, right?
Yeah.
And isn't good at it. And that's what we're talking about. It's a sales process. Well, people are, they have an aversion to that. But that's what we're talking about. You got to be out there, not selling. You just got to be out there, and it's senior level people. I think this is the other thing too. Please do not tell me that some, and I'm going to be blunt here, some out of work group of executives is having a networking group and that you're attending that and that checks the box. No, it doesn't. Networking with a bunch of people who don't have a job does not count as networking. Networking with people who run organizations, who run businesses, who sit on boards, that counts as networking. And again, just don't fool yourself, because I'd rather have you figure out how to spend some time with one organization like that than 10 organizations of mid-level people or people who aren't employed, it's a lot more valuable.
So, speaking, networking, so you're coaching now these A players on how to.
Right.
I mean, what are some other things you talked about?
Yeah, speaking, networking, sitting on boards. Oh, it's all this stuff. Again, it's not rocket science. It's more to
and
me.
it's not a secret.
It's not a secret, but it's more. But it's one of those things. Like, it's fine that it's not a secret. It's just that nobody does it. Not nobody, but there are a lot of people. The vast majority of people don't do this stuff and don't really know how. What's the how? Like, how would you go about sitting on a board? How would you go about getting that kind of access?
But if you're a CIO or even an executive within an IT organization within healthcare, there are people who want you to speak.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's just a matter of tapping into those groups, writing a proposal for Chime or for HIMSS or something to that effect. They'll have you speak.
And at that point, for most people, the thing to keep a focus on, just make a contribution. I'm not asking you to be a used car salesman.
Right.
Just make a contribution. Like, what do you have to contribute to this group, to these leaders?
Right.
Do that, and do that on a regular basis. You want to do it once a quarter? Do it once a quarter. I don't really care. But if you're doing that kind of stuff, you are really differentiating yourself from the vast majority of people who are just inside the box of their current job.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing, when we started this podcast, there was like nobody around, and then we had the yard guy. Now we have some other work going on.
All I can tell you right now is you've done 90 of these, but I think we found the third one you're going to edit.
Probably. All right, so we're talking about A players and A players getting out there. So it really is nurturing your own career. I mean, you have to you have to own it and understand it. Get out there, and you're not even talking about. You're definitely not talking about selling, because in most of these places, all you're doing is getting out and talking about the good work that you've already done. Right? It's like, I could talk about cloud computing for the next 3 hours, and it would be of value to someone, and it would connect me with some people, and I'm giving back to the industry as I sort of do that.
Let me toss out one other thing that as I'm thinking about the executives that I coach right now on career strategy, and we'll do a resume review, which I'll do for free and walk people through. Here's another thing to really keep in mind that very few people are really good at, which is dollarizing your accomplishments. Dollarizing your accomplishments, meaning this is what you've done. What was the financial impact to the business of doing it? What were the revenues generated? What were the costs saved? How do you quantify what you did? And when you can do that, you have the ingredients to tell an amazing story. You have those, call me, I'll help you tell a great story. You don't have those, you got to do a lot of work until you have a great story to tell. If you talk to a great chef, it doesn't matter what the cuisine, and say, what's the key to an amazing meal? They'll all say the exact same thing, which is the best ingredients, right? The best ingredients of a phenomenal resume are quantified accomplishments. And if you are thinking about that now, in light of the fact that you're going to get fired, keeping track of it somehow, taking notes, keeping your own resume updated. I mean, it may sound like a little bit of a morbid effort, but there's going to come a day when you're going to be really glad you did.
So, monetizing your accomplishments, as you're doing a resume walk, what are resume killers? What are resume, just things that make them stand out?
Well, there are fundamental things. I mean, when people are job hopping, hop, and there's no rationale for why. I mean, again, is this top secret? This is not top secret, but there is a question. If you see people do a decline in title and there's no good reason why, or I can't help you to explain why, then that is a potential issue. But those would be the biggest things, I think. I think there are also a lot of reasons why good people end up having, almost everybody has some kind of anomaly on their resume, some kind of move that looks you just like, I don't really get that. That's not necessarily a killer, but we have to be able to understand the story. And you have got to be able to tell the story. Your resume basically is meant to represent you, or your LinkedIn profile, when you're not in the room. But as soon as you're in the room, literally or figuratively, as soon as I got you on the phone or a Skype interview or in person, then you got to take over, and you got to know how to tell that story in a way that's persuasive.
We had an executive coach on a couple weeks ago, and how important is having, I don't know, sort of a career board of directors or some people that you could sort of bounce things off of, like, I'm thinking of going this direction. I mean, does that become important for people depending on the level they're at?
I think definitely. I think there's a lot a lot of value to that. First of all, it makes life better. I mean, because we also call those people friends.
Friends, exactly.
but so I mean, one, it makes life better. But I do think it's hard. When it's you, when you're on the hot seat, or Korn Ferry's calling you. It's the emotions and you need objective people who are not actually they're not in the line of fire, and they're the ones who are able to kind of give you some perspective. Yeah.
I mean, what do you say to the person you just said, that job title when you take a step down? I mean, what's your coaching to somebody who's looking at that right now? I mean, there's clearly some instances where people look at it and go, look, my kid's in college, I got to make
Yeah.
I've got to, I mean, there's stories around this that sort of make sense. But you also understand that this could have ramifications going forward. I mean, how do you coach those people?
Well, first of all, in that kind of situation, if there truly is a family issue, and listen, that whole thing, like my daughter is a sophomore in high school, I cannot reload for 3 years. If you're an executive search consultant, you hear that 20 times a day. It's very, very common. Things have really changed in the US at least, where 40 years ago, 50 years ago, people were just popping their families up and just going anywhere. That has changed. So I think that in and of itself could be a very reasonable thing.
Yeah.
And then I think it's a question around saying, are you still moving the ball forward, and are you still really making an impact and having a difference? And are you maintaining your network? I mean, you're doing all the things to understand that you're probably not going to stay there forever. So what's going to be next beyond that?
I mean, do you see people at a certain age within their career start to really shift their priorities and think about things a little differently? I mean, 30 to 40, you're still driving. You're driving pretty hard. 40 to 50, you might still be driving hard. 50 to 60, maybe not driving as hard, and 60 on, maybe looking for something that's a little less.
Yeah.
I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, by and large. Now, again, I will say that I think people who are, if somebody wants to be, is a C-level person and they want to maintain that, some of those folks are just driving, right? And that's what it's going to take.
Till they're 80.
But yeah, I mean, generally, I would generally agree with that. I think one of the things that we're really just starting to see now is the fact that, this whole picture of retiring at even 65, I think the baby boom is going to be the first generation that's going to be, as usual, say, I'm not doing that. and we're talking to healthcare executives here. I mean, if healthcare continues to get better and better and people's lives continue to extend, I think we're looking in some uncharted territory in terms of what people are going to do in their work lives in their 70s, in their 80s. I don't know, Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, my father retired when he was 58. My father-in-law retired when he was 59, and I can't imagine.
Right.
I mean, I just can't even imagine that.
Exactly.
All right, let's go to the other spectrum. Let's talk about millennials. I want to hire some, potential A players. They're not A. I mean, they just graduated from college. They have pretty decent resume. They're, they've done some neat internships and that kind of stuff. But how do you identify the millennial A player?
Well, one of the things, I don't pretend to be the demography expert, but I think millennial is now technically, no younger than like 26, 25, something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if you start looking at, and it changes. I mean, anybody who has kids knows, right? I mean, it changes year by year, generation by generation. The one thing that I will say, and I think about this as a parent, is like, listen, if you could raise a kid with any level of work ethic, somebody who has had to actually pay their own bills and make their own way to any degree or extent, you're giving that kid an unbelievable advantage because nobody's doing it, at least in the circles that likely, your listeners are moving in. I mean, they're just not. So I'm sorry, there was a question about how do you hire those people?
Well, how do you identify them? So it's interesting the way you describe it. It's like if I know their parents, that's maybe a good indicator of who they, not always. I mean, but I don't know what the indicator is when you sort of look at, I guess you could look at it the same way you look at a normal resume. You say, oh, they had an internship at M&M Mars. They had an internship at, these are all progressing. They took a role right out of college that's pretty challenging. They seem to have gotten promotion. We're still looking at it the same way?
Right. Well, it's a good question. Let me flip it around a little bit and say this. Let's come back to the initial premise of what we were talking about. If you're actually a leader, and you know what that means, You know how not only to select people, but to invest in them and develop them. One of the things that I would say that is a principle that it cuts across age groups is A, players are attracted by high standards. My story on this is a friend of mine, my friend Mark from Michigan, who's gone on to be a really highly effective executive, and he was getting recruited from one big job to an even bigger job at another company. And this new company wanted him to go through 2 days of off-site testing with like an IO psychology firm, which is not fairly standard at those kind of levels, but it must have been new to this company because the HR person at the new company apologized to my friend Mark. She's like, hey, I'm really sorry that we're asking you to take all this time. And Mark is like, are you kidding me? Don't apologize. I think it's awesome. Why? Because he literally said, to me, it shows that you're serious about hiring A players. And he, he's wonderful, but he's not the most humble person I know, nor should he be. He's good. He's like, hey, listen, because I'm good, and I want to work with other good people. And so those kind of high standards are really important. Here's my point relative to you're hiring somebody a year or two out of college. Don't back down on your standards. Be willing to care about people, invest in them, mentor them, guide them, because there are very few people who are willing to do that. But say right up front, this is the job. It's this. If you're not up, no problem. I'm glad to help you make some connections to some other organizations where you might be a better fit. Because the rock stars are like, I'm coming right at you, man. I mean, I can do that. They're not, that's part of what we're looking for.
Right.
But I actually don't think that is, defined to just one age group.
So we don't have to lower the bar. In fact, that would be.
Don't lower the bar. Don't lower the bar. You think about yourself. Yeah. You don't want to work for any organization that's lowering the bar. You're like, dude, you're hiring me to help raise the bar. That's what we're doing here.
So let's talk about investing in mentoring. So this is a topic that comes up a fair amount, and it still strikes me when I hear people talk about succession planning that CIOs are starting to gray out. It's our new. I don't know why it took us so long to recognize this, but if you look around the room of CIOs, right, you see a lot of gray hair. Not only gray hair, but gray hair who is close to retirement.
Right.
And then invariably I'll ask them about succession planning, and they go, well, that's not really my job. I'm like, I'm not sure. First of all, I'm not sure I agree with that. And I tell them, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think your organization would appreciate, if they liked the work that you were doing, they'd appreciate the fact that for the last 3 or 4 years, you have been investing and mentoring and training the next person who's going to step in there. So that was a big lead up to just asking the same question I asked before, which is, what's the best way to invest and mentor somebody when you identify the talent to maybe go to the next level?
Yeah. Well, let's ask the question before the question, which is, why are people not doing succession planning? Because I think we both know there's no lack of articles out there on the importance of it. Yeah. You want to know why? Because people are afraid to deal with the fact that they're going to get fired, meaning age is going to fire them. In these big organizations, you know better than I. These big organizations are very political. They're very tough. You have a C in your title. That's not by accident. You worked your butt off to get there. And guess what? There are 10 people who want your title, who want your job. Yeah. This is Game of Thrones, You're not looking to develop the next king.
I'm not sure it's that cutthroat, but
okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
It can be.
Sure. all I'm saying is that people at this level.
For those of us who lived through the GE succession planning thing, that was literally Game of Thrones. That was crazy.
Or any other. I mean, we all have stories about early on in our careers when you kind of first ran into that. You're like, holy, are you kidding me? Here's my point. People don't do it because they don't want successors. They're like, I don't want. Why would I? If I would, I don't know. Maybe I'm not ready to retire in a year. Maybe I want to hold on for 3 to 5. Maybe I took a second mortgage out on the house, and I'm just saying. And as a result,
you don't want to make it easy for them to fire you. Is that what you're saying?
It's exactly right. Because you know what? I'm not saying it's the only factor, but here's my point: the leaders who will genuinely do that, those people actually are few and far between. So if you're that guy, if you're that gal who is that person, then be that person. Because if you have that confidence of being like, listen, if you want to fire me, fire me. Because I'm doing a great job here and I want to continue to do a great job here. But you fire me, I'll go do a great job for the company down the road. I mean, that's what the best people have, that confidence. If you have that confidence, then you can turn that into your organization and develop great people. And guess what those people want? They want to be developed. They want to be mentored and coached.
Yeah. And I think the thing that goes along with that is when that kind of leader goes to the competitor down the street, a whole bunch of people go, hey, remember me when you get there.
Well, it's one of the things that I always look for in executive search when I'm talking to potential candidates, and I always try to get a feel for that. Who's followed you? And it, again, it doesn't happen all that much, but when I find somebody who's humble, who has the other characteristics I'm looking for, and I find somebody who's like, well, yeah, this guy worked for me here and she worked for me there, and I'm always like, it's not definitive, but it's really helpful.
Yeah, and we had our friend Bob Perkins on a couple weeks ago, and one of the things he likes to say is the definition of a leader is?
You have followers.
Someone who has followers.
And he's right.
They will follow them, and they'll follow them to another organization, and they will follow them, wherever they end up, even if that's in a different geography. So. And
then let's just take a riff off of that for a moment, because I have seen this firsthand in executive search. That person has to be very, very careful about where they go to work next, because most organizations can't handle them. They can't. And recruiting is a seduction process. It is.
You're testing my editing.
No, don't worry. I'm not going to cross the line here, man. I'm going to walk up to the line. I'm not going to cross. No, recruiting is a seduction process, and anybody who's done it knows. People love to close the deal. They love to get people bought in. But then, it's like marriage. You're going to be, you're married a long time. What's it actually going to be like to be in a relationship? If somebody is able to really bring followers, bring people, that tells you something about who they are. They better be working for somebody who is confident enough and secure enough to have that around. And I have been in situations, unfortunate situations, as a search consultant, where I brought somebody in who was that, and the organization just couldn't handle them. Now, they wouldn't tell this, they wouldn't admit that, and nobody will ever admit it, but they really couldn't handle them. And so that person particularly has to be very careful about where they go next.
And then the organization rejects them as sort of a foreign organism.
It's an organ rejection,
yeah.
and makes up 1,000 reasons why it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And none of which are about the organization, by the way. It's all about that guy. Wasn't a good fit. Wasn't this. Wasn't that. I'm like, wasn't anything about you guys, right? No. Couldn't be that.
You don't really get to have that conversation, do you?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're the client. They get to make the decisions.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying,
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, Eric, is there a way for people to follow you? You're not a huge social media fan, but I mean,
yeah, you know what? I'm out on LinkedIn. That's actually a good way to find me. It's HERRENKOHL. That's one good way to find me.
Yeah, and the other easy way to follow you or find you is How to Hire A Players on Amazon. Finding the top people for your team, even if you don't have a recruiting department. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah.
As always, a good time.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Great seeing you.
I always appreciate my time with Eric. He's so insightful and has such a great perspective. And I appreciate him even pulling back the curtain a little bit and showing us what's going on behind the scenes of the process. So hope you enjoyed this show's production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out the website at thisweekinhealthit.com or the YouTube channel at thisweekinhealthit.com/video is the easiest way to get there. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.